All right, I've got about 2 after, so it's about time for us to get going. Good morning, everybody. We're looking at the handout in the back, and I didn't have one for next week because I don't know if we're going to be still talking about this next week. So, it might seem like a detour that we're talking about evangelism and then take a break to talk about personal growth, but that's really not true, because evangelism without personal growth is not going to happen. And the more we grow spiritually, the more it is that we're going to be able to reach out and impact other people, especially when we consider the fact that of trying to make practical application of who we are and what our circumstances and our experiences and talents, all those things, how they all work together to be able to make an impact on other people. Sure, the gospel is what we're trying to get people to understand. And in order to do that, we have to, often, as said so many times here, we're the only Bible that some people ever read. So if we learn how to express the Bible in the best ways, then we can help other people learn the Bible. Because it's one thing to know the verses and what they mean. It's another thing to put them into practice. And if we're not practicing them, we're not really helping anyone, because we're not going to be able to make an impact on them. But the expression of the Word of God in the lives of the faithful Christians is what is going to make an impact on the people around us. And we're talking long-term impact. Now, if someone comes up to you and says, hey, I want to learn how to study the Scriptures, or I want to learn how to be saved, or I want to learn more about Jesus, you don't put them on a long-term express. You put them on an immediate, let's have a Bible study. But we're also talking about a lot of people who already believe they're saved. We're talking about a lot of people who have no idea what salvation means. We're talking about a lot of people in our community around us who have no spiritual awareness. How do you deal with these people? How do you make it so that they would actually want to have a Bible study? And remember the couple of questions we asked, would it be okay, would it be okay if someone asked you for a Bible study? Of course it would. And the way that happens is because they see something in you. But if they don't see anything in you that's different from everyone else that's around, then they have no reason to ask. So I think we've done a great job in the church of helping to teach people, this is how you behave, this is what we do, these are the fruit of the Spirit, this is what we're trying to do good deeds, but we haven't been very practical in many cases, or practical in how we get those things done and what it looks like. And that's what this attempt is to help us figure out, what is it that I can do? Because all of us have abilities and talents and opportunities, and we need to use them to the glory of God. And when we do that, then God receives the glory, and other people who want similar things or want to be able to do similar things or experience similar things will automatically want to be a part of your life. That's the idea. And I have to say it works, it resonates, and it helps people that if you want to be really, really busy, this is a great way to do it. And I don't mean busy as in busy work. I mean busy in doing the work of the kingdom and interacting with people and getting to know people, that kind of thing. This is going to be one way to do that. We're all at various places. We all have different abilities and talents and opportunities, as I've said so many times. That's why I call it a fingerprint. You are a unique Christian. You're able to do things that other people can't, and you're going to be in opportunities that other people will never have. So that's why we need to understand who we are in relationship to what the gospel teaches. So we talked about last week the idea of self-control, the need for self-control, and what that means, how it works with finding really expressing your purpose, living out your purpose in life. And that relates to how we're supposed to be interacting with ourselves and with God and with other people. So if you want to, in a nutshell, we can look at Hebrews chapter 12. And then we're going to move into meekness and faithfulness. Hebrews chapter 12. verse 1 says, "Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." I think this is a great summary of what it means to have self-control. It's not about just saying no to everything. You have to say no to a lot of things. But here he's saying that we are, what is it he's saying that we're saying no to in this verse? Sorry? Yeah, things that weigh us down, and that would include sin, right? Is that the only thing that weighs us down? No, it's not. There are some things that, what would be an example of something else that would weigh you down and keep you from running the race? Huh? Friends, they can pull you down pretty quickly and kind of put the fire out, right? The church does that sometimes. We pour water on someone who gets excited, but the friends have a way of doing that too, right? So they keep us, all right? Anything else? Recreation can get in the way. That's right. Physical body, we have limitations, and there's really nothing you can do about that. You can't cast that away, but we have to deal with it as it comes up, right? Work. Yeah, so there are a lot of things that interfere. And we obviously have some things related to things that we can't get rid of recreation, we can't get rid of our body. But what about things like discouragement? Does that keep people from doing the work? It's one of our greatest enemies. And that could be going back to the friends thing, right? Some of our friends are not as friendly as we think they are. They're trying to discourage us from doing what we know we should do. And that could be through body language or words or whatever. Okay, so Hebrews chapter 12 says, let's lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us and run with endurance the race. So we're putting these things into our lives. And we've said that, there are so many passages in the New Testament that teach that. We've looked at many of those. So this is not just about sin. It's saying yes to the things that we should do, and that's primarily about focus. It's figuring out what that focus is. And Holly brought up a good point last week to me, said that you have to say yes to a lot of things before you know what to say no to, and that's true. But I'm not talking about skills. She said, we don't know what we can do until we try, and that is definitely true. It's not just about skills; it's also about the pursuit, right? So if you have a general observation about life, so if for example, and we'll talk about this especially next week if we get to it. If you say that your talent is sewing, right? And you're going to be able to clothe homeless people because you're going to make clothes for them. Is that a godly, spiritual thing to do? Sure. Can you think of any examples of that in the Bible? Dorcas, yeah. And she was celebrated by the church. She was praised by the apostles because of her effort. Now, if she got into that and said, I'm not going to, there's a certain clothing I don't want to do because I don't think I can do it. That would be certainly about skill, right? And we can learn new skills. But if I were to do that, that's not something that's my forte. And so I have to look at what I can do, what I'm capable of doing, and I know that sewing is not going to be it. I may have tried it once or twice in the past, but I can just tell all of us can do it, right? But some of us are going to have a better propensity than others to fulfill that. So it's a process, and we figure out what things we can do and we can't do. And if you don't really have any idea what your talents are, how do you find them? You just go try stuff, right? And that's what we tell young people: go try everything. And we hope that they will do that, and then they start learning these are the things that I should be focused on. And of course, I don't want to take it to the point where we're not talking about sin. It is important to deal with sin and get rid of it from our lives. That's what we should be doing. All right, so the next idea is the idea of meekness. Now, Matthew chapter 5, And verse 5 says that the meek shall inherit the earth. Let me double check myself. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, or inherit the land, is what it literally says. So, what does it mean to inherit the earth? I had a friend who believed that Christians were going to, at the end, everything was going to come back to normal, come back to what it was in the original time with Adam and Eve, and we're all going to have our land allotted to us throughout the world. Is that what he's talking about? No, it's not what he's talking about. So why would Jesus tell you that the meek shall inherit the earth if we're not going to get the earth? True. That's true. So we get respect for that. Yeah.
We oftentimes think of a meek person as being timid, and that's not true.
Right. That's true. It's not about timidity. Where does the phrase come from? They shall inherit the earth. I'm not asking for the verse. Where does that concept found in the Old Testament? Yeah, it's not. It's related to that. It is related to the land because they would, in the captivity, they would be, if they would be meek, they would receive the inheritance, right? But they already had the inheritance, didn't they? They'd already received it once. What was yours? What is that? Judges 18? Yeah. So this is in relationship to the 12 tribes going into Israel, to take Israel. Actually, Israel wasn't called that yet. He says, "Arise, let us go up and against them, for we have seen the land, and indeed is very good. Would you do nothing? Do not hesitate to go and enter to possess this land. When you go, you will come to a secure people and a large land, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on earth." All right. Psalm 37:11 is another reference to that, is what Kathy said. It says, "The meek shall inherit the earth and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace." So it relates to peace. It doesn't say in Judges that they'll inherit the land, but the implication here is what? What are they going to go and take? The land. Why are they taking the land? It was promised to them by whom? By God. To whom? Who is first that he was promised it to? Abraham. So go all the way back to the promise that God made to Abraham. And if you consider what God was saying, if you are a meek person, and that would mean that you are, what does that imply about your relationship with God? It's a good relationship. Yeah. So you're meekly following your Lord, your God. The promise to Israel was the meek would inherit the earth or the land. What are they going to inherit? Israel. Why? Because God promised us that. Who are the ones who inherited the land? Was it the meek, or was it the people who were rebellious against him? Pretty obvious, right? What happened to the ones who were rebellious against him? They wandered around for 40 years, right? They didn't go take the land because they rejected what God promised to them and said, I'd rather go back to Egypt. So this is a reference that is a concept that Jesus is pulling from the Old Testament as a promise to the people. So it's a figure of speech talking about the promises and the blessings that God has always provided for his people. That is, you will inherit the blessings of God. You will inherit the peace that God comes. And that's what Psalm 37:11 says. You will get the peace of God. So it's not just about peace, but it's certainly not about land. This is about the blessings of God that comes to the people who are meek, right? So this is it's an important idea. In fact, I have Psalm 37 in here in the notes, and I didn't read all of that. Let's go ahead and turn there because the whole section here, starting in verse 7. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it only causes harm. Evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord shall inherit the earth. For yet a little while, and the wicked shall be no more. Indeed, you will look carefully for his place, but it shall be no more. But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. So we're seeing the contrast here between the people who are wicked and the people who are meekly following God. And what are they going to receive? Well, they're going to receive the promises that God had made. They're going to delight themselves in the abundance of peace. So another way of looking at this then would be to say that the meek are the ones who, when everything is over, they're going to be the ones who are left standing. They're going to be the ones who are victorious, because it's not the people who are having all these schemes and tactics to try to steal and take, but it's the people who are going to receive are the people who are meek. Yeah. Did you have something? Yeah.
Yeah, Jason. I think we need to truly define meekness. The best example of meekness that I've ever heard of is Jesus himself.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I either read it or I heard it from a preacher one time. You know, when we think of Jesus, Jesus was like an iron fist in a velvet glove. Because he had the power of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't fathom that. I mean,
Right.
as your Mormons, we can't, because we're talking about God the Father in the very beginning. Everything we see in the night sky, he spoke that into existence. He didn't snap his fingers or say, you do this or you do that. He just spoke it all into existence. And we can't. I mean, that.
You're right. So the greatest example of meekness is Jesus. No question about that, because of the power that he had and how he kept it under control. And that has a lot to do with self-control, right? Self-control is expressed in best ways, godly ways, through meekness. And that's what we have to look at. Now, it's interesting you said the greatest example of meekness is Jesus, and certainly no question about that. Who else has been in the Bible has said to be meek? Moses. Yeah, in fact, what did it say about him? He was the meekest of all the people on earth. Now, that's interesting. Do you remember the context of that? I don't actually have it written down here. Yes, it was when Aaron and Miriam came up to him and said, hey, we want some of this too. We have the right to lead just as much as you do. I mean, they were the same family. And remember, that was Miriam she had leprosy. She had to stay outside the camp. And this was a bad situation. But that's the context in which he said he was meek. Now, he was defending himself, saying, listen, basically, he said this more than once. I never asked for this job. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. In fact, whenever he was asked, when God told him to go, what did he do? He argued, right? I'm not doing this. This is not for me. Get somebody who could do a better job. It's not, so meekness is not about putting yourself down. That's not when he was being meek, but it was to, what would you say would be a good example of then of a good word to address that? The fact that he took that on. That's what meekness is. That's right, because he didn't see himself as any better than anyone else, and he wanted their forgiveness, God to help them. Yeah, I think so. So there's no question about the fact that he recognized what God commanded of him and embraced it. That's what that's about. The embracing of what God wants you to do is what meekness is about. That means that we're putting aside things and the worldly things, but we're meekly submitting ourselves to God. Now, submission, sometimes we use that as, and even though we know the term, we still use it this way sometimes as the idea of resigning to obeying someone else. Well, that's not really the idea. The idea of submission is a decision to obey in the sense of making it your goal just like it's his goal. So God tells us to do this. We can pursue it with all of our heart, or we can just kind of do it just enough to check the box off so that we don't have to worry about it, right? We've seen that before. So God tells us to do good works. How, in what manner are we supposed to do these things? Begrudgingly? No, right? Zealously, because that's a submissive heart. It's one that recognizes this is the direction we're going, and I'm going to pursue it with all my heart, even though I might want to go this way, I might want to go that way. God's going this way, and so I'm going to pursue that with everything that I have. That's the heart of really what it means to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So that's what the idea of meekness is. It's an understanding of reality. It's an understanding of our assigned tasks, our roles. And we all have, are your roles assigned, are they the same as assigned tasks? In a way, yeah. Are you assigned to your roles? We choose them sometimes, but we still have responsibilities within them, right? So as fathers, we can have what's the assigned role with a father with his children? To raise them. So he says to raise them and nurture and admonition of the Lord. We can say, well, okay, I'm gonna give them a Bible study about once a year because I'm doing what God told me to do, right? Or we can say we'll talk about the Bible, but it's going to be just kind of here and there. That's living in the role. That is, we're pursuing, we're doing what God tells us to do. So if God had at the end of time, he could have a list of things that, yeah, okay, I can see you did some things. You were living in your role. But we know that's not the way it works. What God did when he gave us that role is that this is something we're supposed to be pursuing, right? This is something that we're supposed to be giving ourselves to. And all of our roles have to be that way. And we have roles in many different aspects of life that we're responsible for. And if we have many different roles and they're all going different directions, we talked about last week, we're not going to do very well. But when they all are going in the same direction, they're all going toward God, then we're going to do much better. It's going to be a lot easier to maintain that kind of stuff. So, again, this is not about, I don't want to make this into the idea that we have to do enough to earn salvation. That's not what this is about at all. But it is pursuing the things that God wants. Yeah. Yeah, right. And he was a bold man. He would do some pretty outstanding things, but he was still doing that meekly, serving his God, because he understood what his task was. God specifically, Jesus specifically told him to do what? To go where? To the Gentiles. Yeah. And he took that seriously. When Jesus told the apostles, for example, go into all the world, right? He was one of the apostles, I know, but he wasn't the only one that went into the world. What we see in Acts is, they were there in Jerusalem, but they spread out eventually. They spread out. So anyway, that's what meekness is about. That implies that we trust God, right? We trust that He knows what He's doing, and He knows what is best for us. And we also trust Him in when He's telling us these are our roles, this is what you should be doing in your role, that we are going to be able to live that in the best way possible and still be able to be ourselves. We're not robots. You will approach, I use the example of fatherhood, you will approach fatherhood as a man very differently than I might, because I have different abilities and talents and opportunities. So we have to be careful in making judgments about each other. You will approach your role as a wife just differently than anyone else would approach your role as a wife. And that's because we have a general role, but we are left in many ways to figure it out for ourselves of how am I going to pursue this? And it's like someone says when they first taught somebody to drive, they said, just drive and keep it between the ditches, right? And we have these ditches that God has set up. This is the general perspective of how you're going to go, but we get to decide how does that work out? And a lot of that depends on who we are, what our opportunities are, what our experiences are, that kind of thing. So we're going to be talking, that's what meekness is, and that also requires honesty and respect for God's sovereignty. So God is going to be the one who is, what does sovereignty mean? Yeah, it's basically about the rule and the reign of God. We're ruling in what is supposed to be. What God is ruling our lives, and we get to decide how we're going to obey Him and follow Him. Yeah.
It also means absolute authority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. Sovereignty means that He has the right to demand anything He wants and the ability to demand. And thankfully, He's a God who is just and loving. That's the idea of meekness. How does that relate to self-control? Pretty obviously, if you understand what you shouldn't be doing and you see what you are supposed to be doing, meekness then is the acceptance and the embracing of that way that you're going to go. And a lot of that depends on, like I said, who you are, what your opportunities are. You have opportunities to do things that no one else does. And so do you embrace it? Do you even notice? Do you even see the opportunities that are all over, that are right in front of your face? Sometimes we don't even see them, but they're everywhere. We don't have opportunities to do some things, but how many of us have the opportunity to sit down and do a personal Bible study with somebody? It's not that often, right? Especially if you're just waiting for someone, you're not doing anything, you're just waiting for them to ask. It's going to be pretty rare. But when you have the opportunity, what do? You pursue it. But just because you don't necessarily have the opportunity to study the Bible with someone doesn't mean that you don't have opportunities around you to interact with people and to build the relationships and to do many, many other things that are part of our role as who we are as Christians. And so that's part of the idea we're looking at. And that leads us then to faithfulness. Faithfulness is the idea of being trustworthy. It carries the idea of loyalty, and at the heart of it, it's about conviction. The word faithfulness is a word that is derived from the word belief, to believe. And so faithfulness is someone who believes, and because of their belief, they're active. They're doing things. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're doing it consistently. Now, consistency is usually what we focus on when we're talking about faithfulness, and that's a good thing to look at, because consistently doing what we should be doing is exactly what God wants. We're being faithful to God. Somebody asked me the other day about, we were talking about the following the patterns of the gospel, and he was making some kind of comment about being legalistic because none of the churches of Christ had instrumental music. He said, it kind of sounds like legalism to me that you commanded this to everybody. He said, instead of calling it legalism, why don't you call it faithful? Because we're doing what they did 2,000 years ago. We're not changing it. He said, if we have If we know what they did 2,000 years ago and we consistently do what they did, why is that legalism instead of faithfulness? Because we're told to be, we're supposed to follow traditions, right? The traditions of the elders. The traditions of the apostles. Where do the apostles get their traditions? From Jesus, from the Holy Spirit. So these are traditions that God set up. These aren't just traditions that we do. These are things that God set up, and faithfulness implies that we continue to do those things. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and I think it's 11, Paul told them to do the things that he had told them. I'm gonna mess it all up. So 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and verse 1, he says, imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. Now there's other passages that are escaping me right now that you might could remember where Paul tells them to keep the commandments just as he had delivered to them. And I know it says that in 1 Corinthians as well. But the idea there is that we're faithful to God. We're faithful to the directives that God has given to us. And if you are going back again to the metaphor of husbands or fathers raising children, faithfulness implies that you're consistently doing what you should be doing in accordance with God's word. And the better we are at that, the closer we're going to be to each other, to God, that kind of thing. Okay, look at the passages that are listed there. Hebrews chapter 12, again, verses 2 and 3. Remember, verse 1 was about the self-control of putting aside and embracing. And we can also see the meekness in there as well, that we're running with endurance the race that is set before us. And then he says in verse 2, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. What is the example that we have of Jesus related to faithfulness? He endured. He endured. And so when we talk about faithful Christians, we usually, sometimes we use that term to determine whether they are not they're in the assembly at worship. Hey, there's a good indication, right? You got to be here. You got to be a part of the assembly. But that's not the only thing we do as Christians. But when we talk about faithful Christians, we talk about a brother or sister, and especially at funerals, we say they were faithful Christians. What do we mean by that? They were pursuing the things that God wanted them to do. This is who they were. This is part of their character. They were faithful to Him, faithful to God. And so in order to have that, he says, look at verse 3 at the very end of that, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. This is one of the battles that we face whenever we are trying to be more faithful to God, right? We are faithful to Him. It's easy to be faithful to God when you're excited and you're enthused about what you're doing, right? Oh, man. And when you're here, when you're inside the building, it's really easy to be faithful to God. But when you get outside this building and away from the rest of the Christians and into your jobs and into your lives, it becomes very difficult then to be consistent in the things that you should be doing because we get discouraged and weary. And so he gives really part of it's not the only thing, but part of the answer to that is to look to Jesus. Remember what He did. Remember how He lived. Remember the example that we have and strive to be that way so that we're not discouraged and weary. And this is about conviction. The more convicted you are of the truthfulness or the goodness of your living, the more likely it is that you're going to be faithful in it. So we use this quite a bit to talk about lukewarm Christians. We call them, and maybe we shouldn't, but it's kind of derogatory. We call them pew warmers, right? A pew warmer is someone who, they don't do anything with life. They don't do anything with Christianity except they're here. And they come faithfully. And supposing perhaps that that's the only requirement they have for life. The rest of their life is in shambles, and they don't even seem to work at it, but they will at least be here. That's kind of an extreme, but that's what we're talking about. That's not the idea of faithfulness, because meekness is not there. They haven't yet embraced their role as a Christian. They haven't embraced their role in all the other aspects of life. And so they can't really exhibit that. But when we do things that, how many of y'all have ever been in sales before? A few, all right. So they have the little, have you ever been, I was in some place the other day, and they were having some kind of a rally at the front. The store manager got everybody, is it Lowe's? They got them all together and whooping them up, and they were clapping and being excited. Why do businesses do that kind of thing? Because if the employees are excited about the work, they do it better, right? They're more consistent. And so they try to whip this up, and it usually becomes, if there's people if you've attended those things, it's really kind of weird, but if you get into it, it helps you have a better day, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I've seen Christians this way. I've been this way as well. You have to go to so many things, or you have to go to PTP every year. You've got to go to gospel meetings. The reason you're going is just so you can be enthused, so you can continue to do what you're supposed to be doing. But if you are behaving in a way that's natural to you, do you have to really have a rally every morning to, get yourself enthused about getting up and getting ready, getting dressed for the day? Sometimes we have to have a mental discussion, though, right? But it's a lot easier to motivate yourself to do the things that you're good at than it is to do the things that are unnatural for you. Wouldn't you agree to that? If it's unnatural for you, you're not going to want to do it. So aside from the 5 people that said that they had been in sales before, what would it take for me to motivate the rest of you to go out and sell something? Lots of motivation, right? And I'm going to have to coerce and twist arms, and you see the point? Now, if you're a natural salesman, it wouldn't be that difficult. Maybe some pointers here and there, maybe a little bit of motivation. It wouldn't take much at all to motivate you to go out and sell something if you had something to sell, because that's who you are. It's part of your nature. So this is one of the reasons that we have to be careful when we're doing things in a church, that we're giving people opportunities to do things that they're good at. Because if you don't, we put everyone into the same category, and then what happens? The people that are good at that kind of thing, that it's natural for them, they do it, and they see no problem why anyone else couldn't do it. While other people, we have to twist arms and motivate and do all kinds of things to whip them up into getting to do the things that they are not naturally prone to do. Well, what happens if you find the things with these other people that they are prone to do? What are they more likely to do? That. And all of us have that we can do. And that's the idea that we're trying to figure out here. How can you practically find what it is that you're already good at, that you can be participatory in life and spread the gospel as a result of it? That's a great question to ask, and it's a great thing to do. And when you start living in that, you start interacting with people in ways you never thought you would before, because you're doing things in relationship to who you are and to what your opportunities are. That doesn't mean that we don't need to do these other things that we aren't prone to do. There's things in life that we just got to do, and it's good that we do them, especially if we're being told to do them by people in authority. But at the same time, it's good for us also to recognize that there are many other ways to approach this. And so we're going to be trustworthy. We're going to be loyal to God. We're going to be convicted. Look in the last few minutes, Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24, starting in verse 45. Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Now at the end, what we're looking for is that we are faithful to God. When he comes back, we're faithful to him. Now, if you think about this and tie it in with, let's look at, keep your finger there. Let's look at Matthew 25, verse 20. He who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more talents besides them. He said, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also did that with the one with 2 talents. Now, what did he give them the talents based on? Their skills, their abilities. Okay, so wouldn't you assume that in verse 24 of chapter 24, verse 45, the faithful and wise servant, wouldn't you assume that the faithful and wise master gave the faithful and wise servant things to do that were in his wheelhouse, that he had the ability to do? Of course. He wouldn't have made him master of his house if he couldn't be master of his house. You don't put someone into the position that they can't do. So if you think about it in that sense, yes, we're all going to be faithful. We're going to be faithful wherever we are, in whatever position that God puts us, in whatever role that we're part of. And that includes then the pursuits of living that we do. And I realize that we all understand these things, but I think it's important as we discuss this to talk about these and try to get more and more practical so that we can figure out how to get to work. If you want to put it in a sentence, you might say, I serve God or I glorify God by blank. We need to fill in the blank. What is it that you do to glorify God? And you can say, I obey God. Okay, good. I mean, no one's going to argue with that, but if I then come up to you and say, okay, go obey God, what's the first thing you're going to do? You'd say, in what? What do you want me to do? What does he want me to do? But if you glorify God by making clothes for the people who have no clothes, and I say, hey, why don't you go and do what you're supposed to be doing? What is that thing you're going to go do? You're going to go start making clothes because you know specifically this is who I am, this is what I do. So if you came to me and said, hey, Jason, go do your work, my work is not making clothes. I have other things that I do. And we all have those other things. What is the thing that you're doing? And hopefully they'll all overlap. They'll work together really well if we all get involved in them. So that's the idea that we're pushing for in this class. And also, if you look in the bottom of this, we've been over it before, but there are 7 parts of life that these things apply to. We just can't look at the spiritual part or the faithful God and say that's everything. Certainly not. All right, well, thank you all very much for your discussion.